Greetings! This is I, Tantus Narav Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here in the Jewel of Kimahar. And welcome once more. I hope everybody's having a great day. We're going to be talking about Star Trek Adventures today. Diving into starships. So if you're joining me, of course, live on Twitch, hey, Twitch, thank you for joining me. If you're joining me on YouTube, also always thank you for joining me. So, the question for today is, in your Star Trek Adventure games, how have you dealt with starships before? They are an integral part of a Star Trek adventure, but the thing is, they are also something that is, in a way, completely optional. I think that's the interesting thing that you can talk about with it. You don't have to have any Star Trek adventures that deal with starships. You easily can. It can be definitely part of your entire crew and a matter of it, but that's another reason I wanted to kind of do this on its own, because as it does pertain to a lot of other aspects of Star Trek Adventures, it's important to kind of see it as connected with the rest of it and all. But let's get started anyway and talk a little bit about what it means to have a starship and the stats and stuff for it. So we'll just throw out some starships there. So, there are two things you can do with a starship. First off, you can just take an action on a starship. This is no different than anything else. You are on the starship, you're taking an action, you're doing something. This is the same as taking action on the planet, on a starbase, on wherever you are. It's normal. But then the other side of things is you can take an action with the starship. This is using the starship to do something. To search the database, to raise the shields, fire torpedoes, run a scan, teleport someone. All the various other actions that use a component of the starship and perhaps use the starship and its statistics is a thing you can just do. Then you're using the starship. And a lot of people can use the starship at once. It's a complex machine with a lot of intricate parts. Meaning that, when we're talking about a starship and the actions that it takes is really the actions the people are taking aboard the starship more than anything. So, much like a character, a starship has traits. It has attributes, disciplines, basic traits, talents, a lot of things that a character will have. You will have these numbers and information listed, and they will determine what a starship does to a degree. Granted, a starship is just that. It is a starship. It is both a character in your Star Trek game and not, because it doesn't really do anything on its own necessarily. It does stuff with players. So, much like characters, it does have traits. One trait that every starship will have is, of course, the civilization that created it. It gives a basic fundamental aspect of the ship's design. Whether a starship was built by the Federation or the Klingons and is being used by someone else, that reflects a lot of the way that it was built originally. So it kind of helps define things about the ship to begin with. Different cultures in Star Trek manufacture in different ways, and they can have positive and negatives depending on how you interact with it. Other traits a starship might have reflect its construction, its purpose, how it's influenced other past events. The example, if you're going to look into the book that they give, is the Enterprise D from Next Generation, which is Federation starship, Federation flagship, fifth ship to bear the name. Because those are all traits that it has, and they're all very true. It's the fifth Enterprise, means something. It's the flagship, and hey, they're where it comes from, Federation starship. These traits are neutral, having positive and negatives to them, depending on, we've talked about how traits are used in the system. So just keep that in mind. It works like any other traits in the system. Now we get into what is effectively attributes for a starship. Its systems. These are the basic computer, I say computer systems because computers is a system. It's the basic mechanics of the starship and how a character interacts with them. They're the intrinsic capabilities of a starship compared to other vessels of the similar things. The systems are communications, computers, engines, sensors, structures, and weapon. 6 of them, just like characters, have 6 attributes. Each has a rating from 0 to 12. High numbers, greater utility in those systems. When you're using a starship, there are times, much like when using a character, you can encounter using more than one system being applicable, just like using more than one attribute could be applicable to a system. The context of the situation comes up for that one a lot, determined what you're actually going to be using. Pardon me as a mute. I have been a little sick. That's why this has been like a week since I've recorded any of these. So, you know, if I pause to cough or sneeze or anything, that's that, you know. Life doesn't prevent me from educating all of you out there. Just makes it delayed a little bit. After that, the departments pretty well match the disciplines that your characters will have. Command is all about the way the chain of command is built into it. It's the virtues of the ship and the, how it conveys things to both outsiders. You can see in the book how each of the departments relates to each of the systems, much like how disciplines relate to attributes. Con, of course, is flight control, astronavigation, all those kind of things, how well your ship maneuvers. Engineering is the quality of the ship's engineering. It's also its tactical personnel and tools and facilities within it. Security, of course, it represents the skill, training, and number of security personnel. I guess this, in a way, these departments represent the people side of things, rather than the ship side of things. It does reflect the supplies to a degree, but it reflects the people that are aboard the ship as an entire crew. I guess that's the best way to say it. So if your ship is rolling on its own, it rolls on this general average of your crew. So if you've got a really good command crew, that rolls with you have a higher command. If you have really good navigation control, people that are in charge of that, engineering. If you've got a really great security team, great with hand-to-hand and other tactical kind of things, a great science team, a great medicine department, the personnel, doctors, nurses, lab technicians, all those kind of things that work together with it. So, because there's a lot of technology on a starship, and there's a lot of crew, basically a starship is very adaptable. And it can adapt to a wide variety of activities and operations. So, starships don't have focuses like a character. Instead, if a starship itself is rolling, it treats every task as attempts or assists as if it had an applicable focus, basically. So most of the time, you're usually going to have the starship basically assist. Sometimes it can roll some things on its own, but more so, it's basically an extra assistant that the ship itself can assist you in what you're doing. And you just have to consider it having a focus in whatever it's doing. So if you get department score, if you get within the department score of that 20, you get or the department score of that 1, I'm sorry, you get some bonus successes, 2 successes, and 1. So, starships do have talents, like a character do. It's basically something in design or it's equipment that they're focused on that has a benefit just like a talent that a character would have. It's a special thing that it has extra. So keep that in mind. There will be starship talents too. Now, this one I like this image here because the next thing we're going to talk about when it comes to statistics is, of course, scale of a starship. Because starships vary in size. You could be in a tiny shuttlecraft to basically cruisers or battleships. Its scale is its size, and there's several ratings starships use. The scale number is usually between 2 or 6 for Starfleet vessels, and larger ships representing bigger ships. Most starships fall into that range of 2 to 6. There are some exceptional ones like Borg cubes, which are much larger, and scale 1 would be like a shuttlecraft. So if you have scale 1, your shuttlecraft, and then 2 to 6 represents the basics that Starfleet kind of builds under. Scale is important. It also helps with its resilience. The greater the scale, the more it can resist attacks more easily, and it's going to withstand a greater amount of damage before systems are damaged, disabled, or destroyed. Greater scale also have generally greater offensive power, allowing to inflict more energy damage with energy weapons like phasers and disruptors. So scale is important to keep track of. Your shuttlecraft is going to not take nearly as much damage as your Enterprise, for sure, and not have nearly enough firepower, nearly the same firepower. So, starships also then have resistance. Basically, starships are supposed to be resilient. They're supposed to take a hit. They're supposed to exist within space. And, the traveling through space at warp is a tough thing. These vessels have been made to survive basically with little or no support for months or even years at a time. Durability is an important thing for them, that they are to last for quite a while. Its hull, its space frame are both very important to this. How its structural integrity shield and deflector shields work. Redundancies built into a lot of its vital systems. Sheer size can help sometimes too. And this resistance reduces incoming damage suffered to the ship, the same way a character or creature can be tougher. So keep that in mind for resistance too. A ship usually has a resistance rating equal to its scale, though there sometimes are factors that modify that. Keep that in mind. So, we have a couple more things to talk about on the basics of a starship. Shields. So starships, starbases commonly have deflector shields. They're force fields designed to protect against attacks and hazards, deflecting incoming and absorbing energy discharge, deflecting impacts, absorbing energy. They aren't impervious to harm, so enough force and power can break through them, damaging ships or the systems beneath. They have a shields rating, and it's reduced when the ship is subjected to damage, and it can be replenished through actions of the crew or with time. If a vessel suffers too much damage from a single attack or hazard, it could also suffer serious damage that impairs the ship's function until repaired. Normally a ship, again, has shields equal to its structure rating. Hey, look at that, they all match. Plus its security. Though other factors can, again, modify or replace this. Ships' shields are like stress for a character. Think of it that way. Ships don't suffer injury, though. We'll talk about what happens there. Then you have power. These vessels, well, they create a lot of power that you're going to be using for many things. Most of the time it's used on the very core systems like, hey, shields we're just talking about, propulsion, life support, sensors, computers. There's a lot of things you need power for. And a ship has a power rating, which represents its reserves and surplus power. It can use this power to boost and support a variety of actions with the starship. But it can also be lost from complications, hazards, and complications. And consequences. It's a complication twice there. So when you start a scene, your ship has a full capacity of power. Any power that was unused at the end of the previous scene is lost. So it's a kind of like your momentum, but for the ship in a way. In the way that it's, refreshes between scenes. It provides the characters points to draw when they're attempting actions with the ship, or using technologies that draw from the ship's supplies. Basic operations like life support, communications, computer, basic maneuverings already have been powered. So they do not normally use power under normal circumstances. Things like going to warp, restoring depleted shields, require using that power to perform those actions. It's a power requirement. And others can gain bonuses when using power to them. If there's no benefit from using power listed, the following can be attempted to be used. If you're attempting a task with the ship, one or more power could be spent before rolling, each point increasing the complication range to the task by 1. It represents the risk of overloading and problems with putting too much power into the system. If you're successful, you generate an additional momentum per point of power spent. So you can increase the complication range, but in turn, possibly get some more momentum for your characters by trading power for momentum, in a way. And this is a task that you're not normally using power for. Well, I guess you could use it with a task that uses power anyway. But it's if there's no other benefit from power, you can do that. Power can be lost from complications, damage, environmental phenomena, unusual weapons, all these kind of things that can cause power to go away. So, you have a good amount, but if the loss becomes significant, if your current power goes to 0 or less, you suffer a complication. to a randomly determined system, because you're losing vital power. So keep your power up a little bit there. Your normal power capacity is equal to your engine's systems, but there are other factors to that. Again, it's equal to the basics, other factors. Anyway, then you got crew. Hey, just like your character, there's a lot of skilled officers, but also a lot of random personnel. As a character, you often have support of the rest of the crew. You only have a finite amount of support in the crew. Usually this represents basically who's available to help you out. Because as much as you're doing stuff and the ship's doing stuff, hey, a lot of that crew is doing jobs. All those people in engineering, they're doing stuff to make sure those engines are running, that the warp drive is going smooth, that you've got all that power. Maybe there's a couple extra people that you can grab upon, but not that much. Crew support is determined by your ship. So that's basically what it is. It's the amount of crew you have on hand. Most will be busy with your daily routines and keeping the ship running. And so it's kind of the background noise of ship's normal activities. But you can bring basically some members of the crew from that background activities to the forefront and making them active in part of the adventure. We'll talk about crew support a little bit later on, but it is a thing you can do. Your normal crew support per mission is equal to its scale. So that's per mission. Keep that in mind. Not per scene, like power. All right. Let's finish up with some other basics of operating a starship before we move on to combat and the things you do aboard a starship. You're going to be on, technically speaking, you really should be on your starship a lot on your average Star Trek game. Because, well, taking place on a Federation starship most of the time. Granted, you could be on a starship space like in Deep Space Nine or on a planet for various reasons and have full adventures there. But even so, like on a star base, you know, it's going to function a lot like a starship and you're going to spend a lot of time on it. Space is a big part about it. So systems, facilities, and personnel are very important to kind of understand what's there on your starship. And then you have to separate, you know, the two things. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are two type of actions you will take when you're on your ship. Actions aboard it and actions with the ship. And keeping those in mind and distinguishing between the two for the various aspects of the ship that exist is important as a game master. You have to determine from everything that's aboard that ship which actions will be your taking an action aboard and which actions actually will involve a task performed with the ship or by the ship. You know, a lot of those things that are like firing photon torpedoes, searching the library or something like that, that's going to be really actions that are using the ship itself. While, again, just aboard the ship, your characters just take a lot of actions that aren't involved with a lot of things. So, effectively, a character would have to talk with their game master, their GM, if an action that they think they're taking aboard the ship is a ship action rather than just something they're doing on their own, and discuss it. You know, can I use the ship as part of this, or is this just something I'm doing? Important question. I'll mute myself because I'm blowing. Hey, a bunch of different starships from a bunch of different species. Alright, let's talk a little bit about combat here. I'm not going to go into full depths about the starship combat. I talked about combat already, talked about how it works. I'm just going to try to go over the differences between here. I'm not going to go over all the actions you can do on the starship. This is your basics here. So, if you're fighting in starships, it can be just as deadly and intense as with personnel. But oftentimes, it's less costly. And it's oftentimes not as swift. You have shields to weather a lot of situations. Nimble craft can avoid a lot of phenomena. You Once the shields are wore down, you can get death of injury, dozens of, or hundreds of personnel dying if you're depending on the size of your ship. There's a lot of just like with personal combat, there's a lot of tasks that become formed to inflict damage, basically, and do things with other people. We talked about combat before. Go see my episode on combat. I'd recommend that. Kind of check up on this one. Similarly, there's environment and zones with this one too. So it's important to keep that note also. The environment is much larger than the environment that you would have in a normal combat. It's probably possibly hundreds of millions of kilometers difference. It could be an entire star system that your combat is taking place in. Edge of a nebula, an asteroid belt, orbit of a small planet. So defining the environment that this combat is taking place in is very important because there's just such a large area. It's space. And starship combat is also a little bit more three-dimensional. There's zones above and below one another, massive gaps, things like that. So, like with personal combat, zones don't really have a size, and so they're just going to accommodate your need as a game master. Zones within a nebula might be smaller, representing more difficult movement, interfering sensors. Open space much larger. And just the ideas that were with personal zones do kind of apply to starship zones also. And individual zones might have terrain effects too, depending on it. Like if part of them is in an asteroid field, part of them is outside of an asteroid field, that can make a difference. So environment, zones, important thing to keep track of. Once again, go check out the combat one to understand a little breakdown of the zones. They work much the same way. Just you have to think the scale is much, 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 much bigger. Much, much, much. And also much more three-dimensional. So keep that in mind too, that you're dealing with space. A lot of times, Star Trek and a lot of sci-fi media don't display the three-dimensional aspect of space. But it's technically there, and maybe it's just that we're not seeing it from that angle. I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing there. But it's a thing to consider. Now, the big thing about space battles is it could be complex. Keeping things on a kind of sketched map might help sometimes. But, again, depending on the situation and the combat, you might not have to worry about it. But just very complex situations can occur because of the nature of space and zones and stuff like that and how you define them and the environment. So be ready to have to make notes on that. Much more so than the zones and environment of personal combat, space can be it's bigger, more complex. Keep it in mind. So, distances exist too. Contact is when the ships are touching each other. There's usually docking with star bases, shuttlecraft docking and landing, things like that. Contact isn't technically a specific range, but it's a thing that when the ships are really close to basically touching one another. Close range is, your trivial distance from each other. 0 zones. Medium range, you're 1 zone away. You're basically adjacent to the zone of the current other vessel. Long range is 2 zones away. Extreme is anything beyond that. Subspace communications faster than light. Far exceeds the maximum velocity of starships. Communicating is pretty instantaneous, depending on no matter what range you're at. So keep that in mind. All right. We can talk about warp speed a little bit. You can travel basically faster than light. You can travel at warp. It's extremely fast. When you're operating the helm, you must spend 1 or more power and attempt a control plus con task with difficulty 0, modified by terrain as normal, assisted by the ship's engines plus con. Power spent determines how quickly the ship is moving. If it's successful, the ship immediately leaves the area, which normally ends a scene, though an enemy may choose to pursue. And you can't spend more power to go to warp than your engine score. So the better your engines are, the quicker you can go to warp. If the enemies do pursue, they spend power. They have to spend more power than the fleeing ship did to catch up to the fleeing ship. Once they've caught them, then they can choose how to respond at that point in time. So, ideally, with the sensors that you have on your ship, you can scan things up to several light years away in every direction. Long-range sensors are pretty potent in this regard. If an object is closer, smaller objects also, you can get better details. So basically, like, you've got these big long-range sensors, but you want to get close if you want better, more detailed sensors. Better clarity, better detail, at a range of basically a few thousand kilometers at most. Effectively. Just to keep that in mind for, like, when you're using sensors. And it's the helmsman's task to basically move the starship around. Normally it's a difficulty 0 under most circumstances, normal circumstances. If the space is hindered around you, if there's hazards, if you're being hindered or impaired in some way by tractor beam or something like similar, then you might be more difficult. You might actually have a higher difficulty. If there's complications for the engines, a lot of things can affect the way that you move through the terrain. All right, let's talk some tasks. I'm not going to go into detail of a lot of these tasks, but I'm going to talk to you about what a lot of these minor actions, just basically an idea about these things, and tasks you can do. That you can do, and these are like your combat tasks almost. But positions are important too, to note too. Basically, wherever you are on the bridge or elsewhere on the ship determines what kind of task you can do, whatever kind of systems that you have the best control over. There are other sections that talked about, like in the book, that talked about common jobs aboard a starship. Basically, you know, that's what you keep in mind. So you just have some minor actions you can do. You can interact with the environment, whatever's around you. You can change position. You can move to somewhere else on the bridge if you need to. You can prepare. Set up a task. Raise or lower the shields, which if you're in tactical. It is only a minor action to have that happen. If you're lowered, your shields are at 0. If they're raised, they immediately go to their normal maximum score, or whatever previous one they had if they had been damaged and haven't recharged yet or been repaired. You can't raise or lower them the same round, but again, like, it's only a minor action to raise them. And restore, you can also do some minor repairs or adjustments. Now, when you perform a task on your turn, if we're in a starship, especially if we're in starship combat, normally you only get 1. There are a couple other ways to get extra ones: leadership, determination, momentum. We've talked about getting extra tasks with that before. It's the same way here. But you're only 1 person at a time. You can also assist other people. You can create advantages. You can pass your turn. You can ready. There's other tasks. And you can also override the controls of another. But it's a suboptimal controls if you do that, usually. Now, let's talk about the positions, and then we'll talk about the positions and their specific tasks. Again, not going into full details on all of those. There's the commanding officer, the helm, the navigator, sensor operations, security oversight, tactical systems, communications, and internal systems control. Those are your average positions on a bridge. Commanding officer is, of course, the person in command. Normally the ship's captain. They can create an advantage, they can direct, or they can rally. There can be a secondary commanding officer, especially aboard a 24th century vessel. They can't take actions that could contradict the captain, but they could either do their own tasks or assist on the captain's tasks to basically spread the workload of a lot of things they're doing. The helm it certainly can maneuver, can use impulse, warp, evasive actions, attack patterns, or ramming speed. Evasive actions would be avoiding attacks. Attack patterns is getting weapons in a direction to give them an advantage, you know, that kind of thing. Impulse is basically moving the ship around. Maneuver is moving it very slow Impulse goes at higher ranges, that kind of stuff. The navigator plots course, charts hazards. The sensor operator can run sensor sweeps and create new information, scans for weaknesses of enemies, launch probes. Security oversight has internal sensors, deploying security, internal containment fields. That's more for, you know, oh, hey, someone's invaded the ship kind of stuff. Tactical fires weapons, modulates shields, uses the tractor beams. Communications opens hailing frequencies. You want to talk with someone, responds to a hail if they're hailing you, intercepts transmissions, jams signals, and also can you create damage reports, which can be important if your ship gets damaged to find out what's wrong, what needs to be repaired, where do we send people. Internal systems manages power, regenerates shields, is under damage control, and transporters. Now there's also main engineering, which is probably not on the bridge. But if you're in the main engineering, you know, there's a number of tasks you could do there. It's a secondary place for a lot of things. This tends to be a place where you would deal with internal systems tasks, except for usually operating the transporters here. But it could be also easier to do some of these tasks from engineering rather than the bridge. Science labs are another one that can do things. They can do sensor operation tasks. Again, certain operations can only be done from bridges. There's shuttle bays, sick bays, transporter rooms. So yeah, those are the basic positions your characters can be in. So let's just talk about the basics of making an attack and then damaging it and maybe repairing it. Just a little bit about that one. There's damage to a lot of systems. We won't talk about that. You'd have to look it up in the book to see if your specific system is damaged. So as an attacker, you choose the weapon you want to attack with. It's one of your systems your vessel's equipped with. Then you nominate a viable target. Of course, you know, a vessel, another target that would be there. You make a control plus security task assisted by weapons plus security of the ship. Difficulty for the weapon used. Energy weapons are usually 2. Torpedoes are usually 3. If you're going very specific system, increase the difficulty by 1. If it's not within optimal weapon range, increase the difficulty by 1. If you're successful, you inflict damage as described under the weapons. Again, we're not going to go into details about that. You can check in the book to see what the weapons do. Also, you roll to determine what system was hit. Or what system would be hit by your attack. Again, if you're not targeting a specific system, that increases the difficulty by 1. If you're targeting weapons, it's more difficult than just targeting a ship. You've been hit, it inflicts damage. First to the shield, then possibly the ship. So, yeah. Attacks and hazards have damage rating. And you roll challenge die. Yes. The total rolled on the challenge die is applied to the starship. It's just like rolling damage for a character. Your shields are your defensive ability, you know, how much less damage you take, you have resistance and things like that. So yeah, when you get that hit by that damage, your shields go first, then your resistance, with your static resistance and your structural integrity. You know, you could possibly have cover. So yeah. And then you can figure out if you've taken damage by that. So yeah, you roll the challenge dice for the attack or hazard. If they have any resistance dice, you roll those and add the total roll to any static resistance the ship has. Reduce the total damage by 1 point for each total resistance. If there's one or more remaining after that, you lose shields. So basically resistance gets rolled before shields. That's an important thing to note too. Remember, shields are your stress. Resistance are dice you roll to see if you resist things. If you lose 1 point of shields per... Yeah. You can also suffer one or more breaches if a system is struck, depending on certain conditions. If you suffer 5 or more damage from a single attack or hazard, After reduction from resistance, system has a breach. If a ship is reduced to 0 shields by an attack or hazard, you suffer a breach. If you have 0 shields before the attack or hazard and inflicts 1 or more damage, you suffer a breach. A breach on a system varies from 2 factors: what system was hit and how many breaches that system has already suffered. For each one, there's an immediate impact, a short-term penalty, and then the number of breaches suffered the system exceeds a certain threshold, there's additional penalties. And there's a nice chart in the book that tells you, based on the scale, how many times you're damaged, how many times you're disabled, how many times you're destroyed. Examine for like a scale 6, which is the top end of Starfleet ships. Is damaged on 3 breaches, disabled on 6, destroyed on 7 or more. Basically, exceeding your scale destroys things. You don't want to do that. So there's rules for impact, damage, disabled, and destroyed for each of the systems. You can check it out in the book if you want to read up on what those do. When those happen. Ooh. Ooh. Sorry about the cough. Again, still sick. At least I've muted it. Most of the part. I think I've remembered most of it. Alright, they list weapons. Type, range, damage rating, qualities, that kind of thing. Weapons of the Starship have those. You can check in the thing for all that. And there are some additional rules for a small craft operation that I don't think I really will get into right now, because that's, again, like shuttlecraft and runabouts are optional completely. You're probably going to be on a scale 2 to 6 Starfleet vessel on your average Star Trek Adventures game. So if you particularly want to look into it, again, the book is great for it. You know, it gives you some extra information. But, you know, it just gives you some extra shuttlecraft information. Alright, one final small section to talk about here before we end, and that's creating your own starship. Everyone's unique. Each has a specific mission. Each has been on some missions, maybe refits, repairs that have undergone, you know, crew requirements, replacements, how long it's been there. The starship the players will have is going to be just as unique as the players. If you're commanding a Constitution-class starship, it's not going to be the Enterprise. It's going to be its own vessel with its own history. That is just another Constitution-class starship like the Enterprise was, you know? You're not the flagship, but you're a pretty big up there, probably, you know? And it's going to have its own legacy and things like that. So that's the kind of idea you're going to have to go. No matter what ship you choose, each will have its own creation and legacy and things like that. Basically, it has its own life path almost, just like a character would. Service, when it went into service, of course, the year which it came into existence. Its space frame, basically its basic structure, its mission profile, how its normal facilities are done, how many refits it's had. You know, these are basically information that can give for the service of it. The book lists the number of basic space frames that could be used. These are like the Constellation class, Constitution classes, those kind of things, Defiant classes. Just give you some information on those for Starfleet vessels. Other vessels, you'd have to look into other various sources. They do provide some. They also do some basic mission profiles. Things like strategic and diplomatic operations, pathfinding and reconnaissance operations, technical test bed, tactical operations, scientific and survey operations, crisis emergency response, and multi-role explorer. Multi-role explorer would be like your, you know, Star Trek Next Gen. Then we talk refits. Basically, refits are your ability to increase the stiffness of a ship by +1 from what its base stats would have been. Also, I will tell you, basically there's basic systems and bonuses to departments that each frame gives you. So you know where its systems start out with. Mission profiles give additional departments for the basic crew that's required for those missions. Refits are a way to increase the basic statistics of those things. It's upgrades. And a lot of times older ships will get upgrades because newer ships are going to be a little better and kind of things like that. You can't go above 12 if you ever get any refits or stuff like that. And no system may increase by more than 2 or to have any score above 12 from what its base would be. But you could get, basically, effectively, every 10 years a ship's been around, it's probably gotten 1 refit. Think of it that way. So if your ship's pretty old, it's probably using a much older version of a ship with lesser stats to begin with, and it's got a lot more refits. Or doing a much newer one, maybe hasn't had a lot of refits. Just to give you an idea about refits and stuff like that. So there you go. You're now you got your traits, system, departments, talents, scale, resistance, shields, power, crew support, attacks. Traits like maybe prototype, legacy vessel, renowned, long-serving, things like that. We talked a little bit about weaponry. There are a list of talents, of course. Let's see. A starship will have talents equal to its scale. So if you scale 6, you can have 6 talents. If you scale 2, you have 2 talents. There you go. And there's a list of them. And we talked about all the bridge departments and stuff like that. And there you go. There's the basics of it. And again, they do provide some stats for more alien vessels and other types of vessels throughout some of the other books, including this one. But hey, I think that about covers starships. All right, cool. That was fun. Again, it was a good refresher course for me because I've personally, just as a side note here, I haven't used starships in any of my Star Trek Adventures games, but in the one I was a player in, we did use a starship before, so I had some experience with it. But it's one of those things that experiencing a starship and understanding the difference between it and you just as a player is a huge thing. It is a very important aspect of your entire time as a Starfleet officer or as a person in a Star Trek Adventures game, no matter what. It's a space sci-fi game. It's not that you can't have adventures on a planet, on a starbase. But even then, a starbase, that's your starship. The planet's the only different one, and even then, it's not very Star Trek to be on a planet. You could have some smaller adventures there, or a couple of missions, but space calls to you. You're going to have a starship, you're going to travel somewhere, you're going to have a good time. What does that starship represent? What can it do? What can it help you do? These are all questions that you kind of ask along with it, and it determines a little bit of what you do with your starship, where you go, how you use it. It is an interesting combination of all these things that results in you being in Star Trek a little bit more. Sure, you can go on away missions, visit planets, go to star bases, but at some point in time, you're going to be back on your ship researching something, sending out sensors, sending a message to someone. Up, space battle. Up, hazard. Who knows what you get into? It's a miracle of Star Trek, and this is just another big component of it that you have to kind of think about. Is it something... It's both critical and non-critical, I think is the way to look at it, in a way. Your starship will be there. It's an important part of you. It isn't you. and you're not always going to use it. But it's always there in the background, ready to be used, because it's a very important tool that's part of you. It's another character that's part of all of your characters. I guess that's the way you have to think about it. It's another character that's part of all of you. Anyway, I'll end it here for today. If you want to check out more tabletop stuff by me, I do a bunch of stuff during the week. Remember, it goes live on twitch.tv and is then recorded and put up on YouTube. Always check it out on either of those sides. If you're on Twitch, hey, that'll be great. That's just the best either support. If you're on YouTube, subscription, like, ringing the bell. Hey, either place, answering that question. What's your experience with Starships and Star Trek Adventures? And of course, then schedule for the week: Tuesdays, Thursdays, early afternoon for tabletop talking, and then Saturdays, late morning. Crimson Queen, my live play Pathfinder First Edition every Wednesday in the evening at 9 p.m. EST. Saturdays at 6 p.m. discussing tabletop. We talk about the tabletop news of the week. All those things go up on YouTube eventually, but hey, if you want to catch them live with us, we'd love that. And then I have social media, Discord, Twitter. Check out those linked below. And yeah, I'll leave it here. Again, I'm kind of sick, so I'm going to try to keep it short. Made it through today. We're back, baby. We're back, baby. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. And until then, set a course, engage, and I bid you farewell.